All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Madeline Franklin, and I am the Federal Liaison between the Western States Federal Agency Support Team, or WestFAST, and the Western States Water Council, and I'll be the host of today's presentation. Please note, this webinar is currently being recorded. I just hit that record button, and it will be posted to the WestFAST tab, which is located on the Western States Water Council webpage at westernstateswater.org. I will go ahead and drop a link into the chat for future reference. If you would like to go back and refer to something you saw today, please visit that site, and also feel free to share that link with those who couldn't participate today. Slides from today's presentation will also be made available on our website. So today, we'll be talking about pumped storage hydropower. This event is intended to be the first of several webinars exploring pumped storage hydropower. And this webinar is a kind of 101 on the topic. So we're joined by Vladimir Korytarov, who is the director of the Center for Energy, Environmental, and Economic Systems Analysis at Argonne National Laboratory, and by Rocio Uriel Martinez, a research and development staff member at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And before I hand it over to today's presenters, I want to just let you know that we will be taking questions at the end of today's presentation. So you'll be able to use that chat feature or just unmute yourself to speak at that point in time. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Rocio to get us started.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here today and talk pumped storage a little bit with a new audience, which is the Western States. And I hope we have a good discussion after the presentations. Just a very quick outline. I'm Rocio Uriel. As Madeleine said, I work at Oak Ridge as a research economist. I've been here for over a decade. And one of the long-standing projects I've been involved in is putting together the US Hydropower Market Report, which is a data-driven summary of trends in the US hydropower industry and fleet. And in each of those, we always have had chapters or sections on pumped storage hydropower. So most of the information and plots that I'm showing in these slides today come from there. And the link is included in the slides, so you can refer to those reports later if you are interested. In this first part of the webinar, I'm just basically going to be describing the existing US pumped storage hydro fleet, putting it a little bit in the global context too. Where are the projects, when were they built, and then also describe the current US pumped storage development pipeline. Again, where are the projects, what types of projects are being proposed today, how far along in the development process are they? And finally, I want to refer to a couple of pieces of recent federal legislation that support new pumped storage development. So first things first, what is pumped storage hydropower? It is sometimes referred to as a giant water battery. Essentially, for a pumped storage hydropower, we need two reservoirs, an upper reservoir and a lower reservoir at different elevations connected by a penstock. And in these two diagrams here, we show two variants of that general configuration. So on the left, we have a case where one of the reservoirs is connected continuously to a naturally flowing water feature, a river or a lake. And in that case, we talked about that kind of project as open loop pumped storage. If neither of the reservoirs are connected to a naturally flowing water feature, then it's closed loop. In any case, the way it works is that at times of low electricity prices, the water is pumped from the lower reservoir to the upper reservoir and kept there until it's needed at times of high demand, high electricity prices, at which point the water is released towards the lower reservoir, passed through the turbines to generate power as in a conventional hydropower plant. And just like with any storage resource, a pumped storage hydropower plant is a net consumer of electricity. The electricity that is needed to pump the water up the hill is more than what is generated when it's released downwards. And the round-trip efficiency of a pumped storage system, there is a range, but we can say that the central value is 80%. Globally, at the end of 2021, there were 165 gigawatts of pumped storage, and that is most of it in 3 regions of the world, in East Asia, in Europe, and in the US, really within North America. The US accounts for 13% of global hydropower capacity, and in terms of individual countries, it has the 3rd largest fleet in the world after China and Japan. However, if we think of recently constructed pumped storage, in the last decade, 20 new pumped storage hydro plants were added to the global fleet, and 11 of those were in China, 4 in European countries. In the US, only a very small plant was added in that time. And in the US, and for that matter also globally, pumped storage is the technology providing the bulk of utility-scale electrical energy storage capacity. In the US, the fleet is composed of 43 pumped storage plants with a total power capacity of 22 gigawatts and an estimated energy storage capacity of 553 gigawatt hours. And that accounts for 80% of the utility scale storage power capacity as of 2021 and 98% of electrical energy storage capacity. And as we see in the horizontal bar plot, the rest is mostly batteries. And now with this map, we just see where the existing US pumped storage fleet is located. 18 of the 43 plants we have are in the West. So in this map, either the Northwest and Southwest regions, but they account for 22% of US installed capacity. This means that the median size of pumped storage hydropower plants in the West is smaller than in the rest of the country. The map also differentiates there are squares and triangles, and the squares are dedicated pumped storage plants where all the units can perform both the generation and pumping functions. And the hybrid plants, the triangles, are where there are some units that are pumped storage units and others that are conventional hydro units. And I think another important characteristic that of the Western pumped storage fleet is that of the 18 plants there, only 3, 2 in California and 1 in Colorado, are owned by investor-owned electric utilities whose only purpose that they are really focused on producing power and serving electric customers. The rest of the fleet in the West is owned by public agencies, federal, state, or municipal, that manage both water and power. And so they have multiple purposes, and the production of power and the optimization of the pumped storage portion of their projects is often not the first priority. So at the end of the day, it means that some of these plants are not as tuned and as responsive to price signals from the electricity market as the ones that are owned by purely electric utilities are. And this, the next slide is about when the current fleet was built. There has been no new large-scale pumped storage plant built in the US since the 1990s. There have been increases in installed capacity since then, but have been mostly upgrades to existing facilities. And we see that both in terms of capacity, pumped storage capacity, which is the upper panel of the plot, and number of plants, most of the fleet came online between 1960 and 1990. And this generation of plants were all built with the idea that pumped storage hydro was a peaking complement to nuclear and thermal baseload plants that provided cheap pumping power during the night hours, and pumped storage was performing the function of following the demand peaks during the day. And when we think about new pumped storage that is being proposed today, its function is different. And I think Vladimir will talk more about that in his presentation. So no new large pumped storage facilities in the last almost 3 decades at this point. But starting in the late 2000s, we've seen a renewed interest in pumped storage development. And therefore more activity in the FERC development pipeline, more preliminary permit applications being submitted. Why? I think part of that is regulatory. So FERC in 2007 issued Order 890, which directs ISOs, RTOs, so in the West, for example, the California ISO, to modify their market rules so that storage resources could participate in ancillary service markets. This essentially opened up new possible revenue streams for pumped storage. And then a second thing that made for an attractive prospect for pumped storage is the fact that, in the late 2000s, we start seeing more wind and solar installations and states passing renewable portfolio standards. So having objectives or mandates for additional variable renewable installation. And pumped storage is well suited to integrate variable renewables in the grid. So these two were good things for pumped storage, but almost at the same time, as we see in the plot, we get to 2008, there is a very sharp drop in electricity prices, and really they have stayed lower all through the 2010s relative to the previous decade, and that has challenged a little bit the business case for new pumped storage. So now moving to the development pipeline. This map is a snapshot of what was in the FERC development pipeline at the end of 2021. At that point, there were 96 pumped storage projects proposed. The bottom layer of the map shows us for each state which requirements or goals they have in terms of renewable or clean energy goals. And basically, the darker a state is colored, the more ambitious the goal. And we see that most of the pumped storage projects are either located in states that have ambitious goals or next to them so that they could serve those markets. And we do see a big concentration of projects in the West. Not only more projects in the West, but also larger. The median size of projects in the West, 500 megawatts versus 179 megawatts in the rest of the country. The other thing we see is that almost all of the circles are either yellow or green, and that means that these developers have either submitted an application for a preliminary permit to FERC or have been issued one already. Two things to say about preliminary permits. This is a very early phase of the development process where developers are just conducting feasibility studies. At that point, the official permitting, official licensing process has not started yet. And based on my experience of looking at these numbers basically for the last decade, a very small share of projects with preliminary permits move to the next phase, which is actually submitting a final license application to FERC. But preliminary permits, what they do is they give the holder, the developer that has one, exclusive rights to develop that specific site for a 3-year period. So there is an option value to have a preliminary permit, and there is not a very high barrier of entry to get one. So that's why we see a lot of them. Then since the end of 2021, if we updated this map to see how the pipeline looks today, we would additionally see 2 orange circles, so projects with pending licenses. Both of those are in the West, so it will be the Goldendale project in Washington and the Seminole project in Wyoming. And finally, we see 3 blue dots, which are the projects that already have a FERC license. Again, they are all in the West. Eagle Mountain in California, Swan Lake in Oregon, Gordon Butte in Montana. 2 other things I wanted to mention about the development pipeline is in terms of project types, there is an increased focus on closed loop projects. More than 80% of projects in the pipeline right now are closed loop. And that's mostly because the environmental effects of closed loop pumped storage projects are generally considered lower than for open loop projects. So it is expected that those projects could have an easier time, a shorter time getting permitted. Although as with everything in hydro, everything really might change. It's very case specific. And then the second thing is somewhat of a development in terms of who are the developers that are submitting preliminary permit applications. This is something we saw last year in 2022. For the first time, in a long time, several investor-owned utilities submitted preliminary permit applications. It is still the case that most of the preliminary permits are held by private non-utilities. So, for example, limited liability corporations. But we see an increased interest from investor-owned utilities. I think this is noteworthy for two reasons. First, because this means, I think, that these utilities, as they do their long-term planning, are seeing that the levels of variable renewable penetration and the objectives for additional installations of wind and solar are making more salient the need for long duration energy storage. And pumped storage is basically the only mature, commercially proven technology to give you long duration energy storage. And second, investor-owned utilities might have a little bit of an easier time bringing a project to construction, in the sense that they can finance it through their rate base rather than having to put together financing from multiple other sources. And also, they don't need to negotiate a power purchase agreement. They will use those assets as part of their portfolio of assets to serve their customers. And now here, just a little bit more detail about the 3 projects that are already licensed. All of them are closed loop projects. And in the table, I put together the dates, some key dates, to show how long it took for them to go through the licensing process. So from the moment that they essentially made the decision and communicated to FERC, okay, we are gonna go ahead with a license application, to the time the final license was issued, we see that there is a pretty wide range across these 3 projects, between 3.6 years for Gordon Butte and almost 9 years for Swan Lake. And then the other point is that at this point, as of 2023, all of these projects have had a license for 3 years or more. This means that they already have had to ask for at least one extension to the deadline to commence construction, which in the standard term in the license is that you are supposed to start construction within 2 years. And some of the post-licensing challenges, the things that are delaying the process or are being challenging to arrange, are additional permits. For example, land rights, securing all the land rights is taking quite a bit of time for some of these projects, and also financing and power purchase agreements. And then to conclude, I just wanted to mention these 2 pieces of federal legislation that are trying to make things a little easier for new pumped storage to be built. I'm going to start by the second one, which is older. So the American Water Infrastructure Act of 2018 directed FERC to introduce an expedited licensing process for qualifying closed-loop pumped storage projects. This means that for those projects that qualify and ask to use this process, FERC has to issue a final decision on the license application within 2 years since the submission of the final license application. And it is not that you are a closed loop project and you automatically qualify for this. There are some additional conditions as mentioned in that last bullet. And then more recently, the Inflation Reduction Act includes tax credits for new storage facilities. I think the 2 most important points of, there are many details about these credits, but that the full amount would be 30% of eligible investment costs for a new pumped storage hydropower plant. And the eligibility period is for plants that are placed in service from 2025 to 2032. And that's basically it. I think I'm going to stop here. This is just a summary of of some of the points I made, but I want to pass it to Vladimir for the second part of the webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rasia. Let me first say, yeah, I'm very happy to be here, and let me share my screen here. Okay. So my name is Vladimir Kuritarov, and I'm with Argonne National Laboratory. I'm leading the water power research program here at Argonne. So I'm closely collaborating with the DOE's Office of Water Power Technologies Office. So most of the pump storage research that I'm going to be talking about here is actually funded by the Water Power Technologies Office at DOE. So let me start with a couple of quotes about pump storage hydropower. So a couple of years ago, there was International Hydropower Association, and the DOE organized this international forum on pump storage hydropower. So Secretary Grenfell was participating, and she said that pump storage hydropower is the only commercialized form of long duration energy storage that is currently available. And then Kelly Speaks-Backman, who was then acting Assistant Secretary at DOE, she also said that pump storage hydropower can and will continue to play a crucial role in our fight against climate change. So that's something, as I would like to always mention that it's the role of pump storage hydropower is really very important if we want to have clean electricity and decarbonize the electric sector, and by translation the rest of the economy. So for this presentation here, I'm going to be covering several topics. First, the concept of the pump storage and resource potential, how much potential we have in the United States. Then we'll provide a brief overview of pump storage technologies, how pump storage benefits the electrical grid. We'll cover that as well. And then we'll maybe highlight a few new and innovative pump storage technologies, because the technology is mature and proven, but it's still evolving, and research is going on constantly. And then finally, how to determine the value of pump storage projects. That's something that has been really an issue, and we'd like to address that as well. So talking first about the concept, pump storage hydropower is the first grid-scale energy storage. It is a proven and reliable commercial technology. The unit sizes can vary from like about 1 megawatt to up to 500 megawatts. And plant capacity, each plant can actually contain multiple generating units. So the plant capacity can go up to about 3,000 megawatts. It could be theoretically even more than that, but that's the largest plant in the US that we have is Bath County. It's 3,000 megawatts. It's also providing for a large energy storage. The typical values for energy storage is 8 to 10 hours or longer. So if you make a bigger reservoir, you can have more energy and longer duration as well. And there are several technologies that are currently being used for pump storage hydropower, and those are fixed speed, adjustable speed, ternary, and quaternary. With regard to the resource potential, people are often asking, do we have new locations for future pump storage power plants? And Enel has looked into that, and they published a study last year where they found the technical potential for almost 12,000 sites in the continental US, plus several thousand in Alaska, and even some in Puerto Rico and Hawaii. So there is quite a bit of potential there for new pump storage hydro. With regard to the technologies, we have, I mentioned several types, and actually all of the existing pump storage hydropower plants in the US are actually fixed speed technology. So they can vary their power output in the generation mode, but during the pumping, they can only pump with a single speed, basically with a single power consumption from the grid. They can, just cannot vary the pumping power. So that was something that in Japan, they looked how to make pumping more flexible. So they, in the beginning of 90s, that was almost 30 years ago, they actually invented adjustable speed pump storage hydropower. So there are two types of adjustable speed, doubly fed induction machines and converter fed synchronous machines. So those are the two that are shown here. Both apply some converters that help adjust the speed of the machine. And by adjusting the speed, they can provide more efficiency in the generating mode, but more importantly, they can actually pump with the variable power consumption. So typically for the pumping, adjustable power plant can use power, can vary the power between 70% and 100% of the nominal power. So that is very important for a number of reasons, and one is to provide more flexibility during the pumping, especially during the night hours when you need to have more flexibility, for example, to adjust the power output and compensate the variability of wind, for example. There are also ternary units. They are called ternary because they have three components: motor, generator, turbine, and pump as a separate. In the previous one that we covered here, all of these use basically reversible pump turbines. So that's just the motor, generator, and reversible pump turbine. Here they have a separate turbine and separate pump, and there are two variations depending on how they are arranged in the plant and so on. So the thing here is that these configurations provide even more flexibility because turbine and pump, if they apply hydraulic short circuit, they can actually operate at the same time, and you can easily regulate the power output either in generating mode or in the pumping mode. So basically, these ternary units can operate from plus 100% of capacity all the way down to minus 100% in the pumping mode. And finally, the quaternary technology has even motor and generator separated, and we have four components here, so that's why it's called quaternary. And it can also operate in the hydraulic short circuit, so pump and turbine can operate at the same time and provide for a great flexibility, basically from minus 100% to plus 100% of capacity. So how pump storage supports the grid? Well, we know that clean energy goals require reliance on large amount of variable energy resources like wind and solar, but those are, because of their variability, sometimes difficult to manage. And pump storage enables the high penetration of these resources in the system because they provide large quantities of energy storage and full range of ancillary services that are necessary for grid operation. Also, pump storage provides large amount of flexible dispatchable capacity. Hundreds and thousands of megawatts we have pump storage, which can always serve to cover the shortfalls in wind or solar generation. It can also mitigate overgeneration of wind and solar through time shifting and storing excess generation for some later use. And also, pump storage can improve dynamic behavior and stability of the power system, thus increasing the reliability of system operation. So everybody would like to have more wind and solar in the system, of course, but these generation resources are characterized by their variability and uncertainty. So better forecasting can reduce the uncertainty. So with the advanced forecasting, we know exactly when we can expect more wind and when the wind will die down and things like that. But still, we need to address variability because when there is no wind, we have to employ something else. And for that, we need more flexibility in the system to provide compensation for those variations of variable renewables. And pump storage is the technology that actually provides a great deal of flexibility to the grid. It shifts the load from peak to off-peak periods and increases the system operation by reducing the operation of expensive peaking units. So you don't really need to use that much gas turbines and peaking units. It provides contingency reserves like spinning, non-spinning, and supplemental reserves, and provides a regulation reserve, which is helping system maintain the frequency at a narrow band around the nominal system frequency. Pump storage also provides flexibility reserves and load following. So if we have some ramping needs to meet the evening peak demand, pump storage can quickly ramp up and provide necessary dispatchable capacity for that. And also pump storage can provide energy imbalance reduction, because if we have several areas with the wind and solar power with interties, sometimes because of the errors in forecasting errors and so on, those intertie exchanges are not as what were planned. So pump storage can always, correct those exchanges and balance out the control areas. So this is the list of most of the pump storage services that are provided to the grid and the power system in general. It provides bulk power capacity and energy services like energy arbitrage, dispatchable capacity on the number of ancillary services here, stability services, indirect system benefits, also transmission benefits like transmission congestion relief, transmission investment deferral, and so on. And also some non-energy benefits like local economic development and job creation, portfolio diversification, and also by employing and supporting increased amount of variable renewables, it reduces the dependence on fossil fuels. You can see that, these highlighted ones are the currently ones that are compensated in most electricity markets, but a lot of other ones are not actually, compensated, and pump storage is providing those by just being in the system and operating. So why do we have not much pump storage now being developed? Pump storage has great benefits. We saw that it can benefit the grid in many different ways and so on. But as Rocio said, in her presentation, we didn't really get much new development of pump storage in recent years. So there are a number of reasons for that. So there, investment risk, because pump storage projects have high capital investment cost. There is a long licensing and permitting process. Rocio mentioned some of that. There's also a long construction time and the payback period. So getting a return on investment may take 15, 20 years or so. So many private companies are not willing to wait that long. There are also market uncertainties, like many pump storage services are currently not compensated. There is also a lack of long-term power purchase agreements with off-takers. That's one of the things that would provide more stability for the financial business model. There are also environmental issues. They're mostly related to open loop pump storage designs. Closed loop have very, very much fewer environmental issues. Public acceptance is also an issue because public is often opposed to large energy projects. And also there is an inadequate representation of pump storage power plants in power systems modeling tools. So that those models and tools, they don't really capture all of the benefits and value of pump storage projects in during the planning process. So that's one of the things why they may not be always recognized as needed by those tools. So here I would like to mention there are few selected innovative technologies that I wanted just to cover in this presentation here. And one of them is the submersible pump turbines and motor generators. This is the technology that is being developed by Obermeyer-Hardow. And the key innovation here is that it avoids the need for the construction of an underground powerhouse, because both turbine and motor generator can be actually submerged into this kind of vertical shaft. And you can operate them in there in both generating and pumping mode. And when you need to take them out for maintenance, you can basically just pull them out and do the maintenance and return them down. So this reduces the need for the underground powerhouse, which is very costly, and so this may actually reduce the cost of new pump storage power plants. The next one that I wanted to mention here is the technology that's being developed by QuidNet Energy. And they have developed a concept that basically stores water underground, under pressure of rock layers. And when you want to generate electricity, you let the water out. So you open the valve, and the water is going through the pipe out and through the turbine, turns the turbine and the generator, and generates electricity, and then goes into this surface reservoir. So this is opposite from the conventional pump storage, where you have the upper reservoir, which is higher elevation, and lower reservoir is lower elevation. Here, basically, the upper reservoir is underground, and lower low pressure reservoir is at the ground. So this technology can be, very flexible with regard to, the unit sizes and so on, and it drives the costs down, because it uses some of the, experience and expertise from the oil and gas industry, and it doesn't require much. It requires just one reservoir, which can be a surface reservoir, and so it's very much something that would be less expensive than conventional pump storage power plants. There are also some hybrid power plants, and I wanted to just show this one that is developed by Max Vogel company in Germany. They are a wind company, but they came to an idea to use the base of the turbine here as a small water pool, and having multiple turbines, you have this kind of like a pool at their base. They can create a small upper reservoir for pump storage, and then use an existing lake or some other man-made reservoir for the lower reservoir. So this is something that may provide for less expensive hybrid operation of pump storage with the wind. Similar technologies can be also used for hybrid pump storage power plants with solar and other resources as well. And I also wanted to mention this hybrid technology, which includes a pump storage power plant and the desalination power plant. So it uses seawater for the pump storage operations. It pumps water into the upper reservoir, and then it can operate as both a pump storage hydropower plant if the water is released through the turbine, or the water can be also released through reverse osmosis plant and generate fresh water to consumers. And some of that savings that is achieved here is that for the reverse osmosis plant, you don't really need to use any electricity for that, because the water in the upper reservoir is actually using gravity, falling down and going through the reverse osmosis plant, and then going down to the ocean. And finally, I mentioned that it was one of the challenges how to determine the value of pump storage projects. So Water Power Technologies Office actually engaged a 5-lab team here that was led by Argonne to develop a comprehensive and transparent evaluation process for assessment of existing and new pump storage projects or projects upgrades. And the lab team developed this 15-step evaluation process, which is described in the Pump Storage Evaluation Guidebook. And in addition to that, the lab team also developed an evaluation tool. This is a publicly available evaluation tool that's something that can be used by developers or energy analysts to look into the evaluation of pump storage projects. And the tool includes a number of advanced features like embedded price taker and price influence models. It includes multi-criteria decision analysis and also financial worksheets and benefit cost analysis as well. So this is something that we think is going to be very useful for a number of pump storage developers in the future when they want to estimate the value of the projects and see how it ranks financially and so on. So this is all that we had to present for today, and we would like to welcome any questions.
Thank you. And so we're now going to open up for questions, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question by first raising your hand. and I'll call on you. Or if you prefer, you can use the chat feature and I'll read your question aloud for our presenters. And I do right away see a question in the chat from Michelle Bushman, so I will read that out first. For the closed loop with water storage sites above ground, is there a sense of how much water is lost to evaporation and seepage to aquifers, assuming unlined storage, and therefore how much water has to be added to the closed loop system and how frequently? And are they dependent on precipitation spring runoff to recharge the system?
Okay, so maybe I can start addressing this question, and Rocio, you may want to add something. So typically in the United States, the operation is not a huge problem. I mean, it is more of a problem in some countries that are, in tropical areas and things like that. But in the United States, typically, I don't really have numbers right now, but it's a very small amount of water that needs to be replenished, and it's typically done once a year or once in 2 years when you actually do refilling of the water. It is assuming, of course, that the reservoir is lined or has a watertight surface so that you don't lose much water through the ground. But evaporation has not been a big issue. In some of the countries, like in India and so on, where this evaporation is much bigger of a problem, they are now also planning to put floating solar cells and panels on the surface of the reservoir, so that will help reduce the evaporation. In the US, you may do that as well. I mean, you can also add the floating cells, but that is more, I guess, to add some additional renewable energy to the system rather than it helps with the operation as well, but it's not the only benefit. So, Rocio, I don't know if you want to maybe add anything else.
I don't have specific numbers. I mean, the thing with closed loop pump storage, we basically don't have any in the US right now, so it's we don't have much experience on this type of system. But yeah, it's expected to be a small fraction to be done once a year or so. And are they dependent on precipitation or spring runoff to recharge the system? I think, I mean, in a closed loop, okay.
You see, the closed loop has to be initially filled from somewhere, so,
right.
so you can fill
yeah.
it either from some nearby river or lake,
yeah.
or in many cases, what they are planning to do is use underground water for initial filling. And later on, that same source can be used for refilling occasionally, but as I said, I mean, typically that's not a huge problem because you have also precipitation that can be captured, of course, and it adds to the volume of water. So you have evaporation, but you have precipitation. So the difference is typically a small percentage only that you need to refill, maybe once a year or every other year.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple more questions in the chat, but first I saw a hand. So Chad Abel, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm curious in the situation where you have to pump to the upper reservoir. I think you said in the presentation that typically there's like a 80% return on the energy that required to pump up in order to get the energy to create the hydropower coming back down. In the existing pump storage operations, so the ones that currently exist and operate, do they use hydropower for pumping up? Or is that like a diesel generator, which just contributes to further greenhouse gas emissions? Because I'm surprised at how often they use diesel in hydroelectric operations. So that's my question.
Okay, so diesel units at the hydropower plants are typically just for backup and for black start and things like that. So those are like for station use if you need the power and you get disconnected from the grid. So you normally generate only hydropower using hydro turbines and generators. For pump storage, you also use the hydropower basically, or the energy from the grid. for pumping. And that composition of the energy from the grid depends on the plant mix that you have in that area. So you're not running diesel units for the pumping. That is not really how it works. You're using the power from the grid to power the pumps that you have in the power plant, and then use that power to get the water up to the upper reservoir.
But there is a chance then you're providing long duration energy storage, but potentially if you're feeding from the grid, it's from sources that contribute to emissions otherwise.
Right. So it depends on the plant mix that you have in the grid. So you may have like still some fossil fuels that are producing electricity in the grid, but as the plant mix is going to be changing over time, and more wind and solar will be actually producing more energy for the grid. The structure of that pumping energy will also change, because it will shift more toward the clean energy resources, of course. So you have wind, solar, other hydropower that can provide for the pumping. You have other clean energy resources like nuclear or geothermal and things like that. So those are the ones that will be more involved in future in electricity generation. And more of the fossil fuels, fossil fuel power plants will be retired. So the plant mix and the electricity generation sources will be changing in the future more in the direction of clean energy generation.
Great, thank you. We'll get back to the chat here. So the next question comes from Marilyn Fonseca. I apologize if I messed up your last name. Has access to water rights or lack of access been an issue affecting development of these systems?
Well,
yeah.
I realized that we were talking to a water focus group, and the water rights portion of the licensing process is something I haven't looked much into, honestly, because that happens at the state level, and I've been looking more at the federal pieces of permitting. But for the 3 projects that are already licensed, I went to their license applications, and they provide some details about the water rights and the water sources they are going to use. And I saw that one of them is planning to use surface water from a creek, and the other 2 groundwater. And they, when they submitted the license application, they were in the process of negotiating those water rights with the states. And it doesn't seem that it was, I mean, it worked out, they got licenses, but I honestly haven't looked into that piece in much detail. And I realize it is important. So it's something probably that we should look more into going forward.
Right, that's correct. So if you look at the number of permits that are filed with FERC, there are like dozens and dozens of permits for new pump storage projects. All of those basically have solved the water rights issues. Otherwise, they wouldn't be really, even filing for a permit. So water rights could be a problem in some cases, but as I showed in the slide with the potential of pump storage potential, there's so many locations in the US that you can always find ones that you can actually get the water rights and develop the pump storage power plant at that location. So it's not a showstopper. It could be an issue in some cases, but it's not a showstopper because there are many locations where you can have access to water.
All right, our next question. And Roger, I believe you were building off of Michelle's question, so I'm not sure if you got the answer you need. You said, in other words, what is the water loss in the process?
Right. Yeah. So it was. I think you answered it, but I don't know if it was the 80%. Maybe that was the net energy between pumping it back up and then what you gain.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that was electricity, not water. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that was one of the questions. Is especially in the West, dealing with reservoirs that are getting smaller and shrinking. So what could be if you talk to folks that are looking at the reservoir from a water management perspective, would you, anticipate losing a lot of water? Or it sounds like you need to fill the reservoir, and then there's a little bit of loss through
Right.
ET and seepage unless you line it.
That's correct. So yes, so 80% efficiency is the round trip efficiency for electrical output. So you consume, let's say, 100 megawatt hours from the grid to pump the water up, and then when you're generating using that same water, you get 80 megawatt hours out. So pump storage is like any other energy storage technology. It consumes more energy than what it produces because it's energy storage. There is no 100% efficiency in energy storage. With regard to the water use, if you have a closed loop system, the water use is basically almost zero because you're just recycling the same water up and down throughout the year. And you lose some through evaporation and maybe some seepage, but that is on a range of maybe few percentage points, like 1 to 3 to 4%. So I don't really have the numbers now, but it's not more than that. I would say that typically it would be like maybe 1 to 5% would be the water loss at most in the closed loop systems. So you're not really losing much water there. So you're basically recycling most of the water throughout the year, and then you may just occasionally need to refill a little bit. And as I said before, you also have precipitation, and that can provide some additional water to the reservoir and so on. So overall, it's not really a huge consumption of water at all in closed loop systems. The same thing is with open loop systems, because you're just using the water from the lower resource, which is maybe a lake or a river, pumping into the upper reservoir, and then returning back to the same river or lake. So that's not really there is no consumption; it's just the use.
And just to follow up, I think on one of your other responses, you could presumably, or maybe it would be recommended to, with the energy offsets, you could site solar next to it or wind farms next to it, so that the energy that you're needing to pump it up during off-peak times is well, maybe not off-peak times, but during times is done through other clean sources.
Exactly. That's the idea for the hybrid projects, and we don't really have now in the US hybrid solar plus pump storage. But just one bit of information here is that, for example, when I looked last year, 60% of new solar energy projects are actually being built as hybrid projects with some kind of energy storage, typically lithium-ion batteries. So they realize that this kind of hybrid operation is actually benefiting, and they provide electricity from sun for both customers sent to the grid, but also when they have extra access, they can put it into storage. So storage can also firm up their output. It can flatten the variations and smooth all of those variations. So that's something that they realize is providing more valuable resource than if you just have solar panels.
And to that end, I think we have Kelly Witten in the chat who said there are a few preliminary applications that talk about the use of floating solar panels. One in New Mexico, which is a proposed size, is 9,000 megawatts.
All right. So yes, in the southwestern US, evaporation is definitely probably going to be an issue. We don't really have too many of the pump storage power plants right there now, but yes, that really makes sense to have floating solar panels to cover the reservoirs.
Great. So we just have a few minutes left. We do have a few questions. We'll try to get to them all. The next question from Carl Reese: is pumping time to match off-peak times when excess power is on the grid?
Okay, so that was traditionally how pump storage were operated. They were pumping during the night when the demand was low, and they were generating during the day when the demand was high. But things are changing now. So now with the additional solar and wind generation in the system, as I showed in one of the slides, there was a so-called duck curve. You may actually have a draw during the day, and the net electricity demand may be actually lowest in the midday when the sun is the highest. And so pump storage may be actually needed to pump during the day as well, not only during the night. So the operation of the pump storage is now basically following the net load needs. And in areas where the traditional utilities are operating like regulated utilities, you will follow the net load demand. When you have a market and pump storage power plant is operating in the market area, you would follow the market prices, and you would pump when the market prices are low, and you would generate when the electricity market prices are high. So you may actually find now pump storage power plants that are operating multiple times during the day in both pumping and generating mode.
Great. All right, next question. And I see a couple of hands. We'll get to you. From Michelle Bushman, you mentioned 2 phases of a FERC license, a preliminary license to assess the site and establish a priority, and a 3-year extendable time to take the next step, such as acquiring land and other permits. Is this 3-year period when the applicant also seeks water rights and water quality permits, or does that not happen until the 2nd phase of FERC licensing process begins?
Yeah, so the preliminary permit phase is 3 years and can be extended actually other 4 years. And I think part of all the feasibility evaluation studies that happen at that point will include looking into the possibilities for water rights. And I think I saw another question on the chat about this. It's true, to get a preliminary permit, you don't need to have the water rights figured out. I'm pretty sure about that. It's at that point, you just have to give some very tentative information. It is in the process of first feasibility evaluation, and then when you say to FERC, okay, I'm going to go ahead with the license, and you work on preparing the license, that's where really, I think, the negotiations for water rights will be happening mostly.
Great, thank you. We had a couple follow-ups on water rights. I think mostly comments. Kelly said 2 proposed projects in Arizona that surrendered their preliminary permits were because of their inability to get water rights. And then Tony Willardson, I'm sorry for speeding through these here, said in the past, FERC has taken the position that they have no authority to consider state water rights laws, and they may issue a preliminary permit to an entity that can't get a state water right. And then I think right after Tony, we did have a couple raised hands. If we do not get to your question, we'll try our best to get back to you. So if you put something in the chat, if we run out of time, we'll see how we can get your questions answered. But Stephanie, I did see your hand. I wanted to call on you.
Yeah, I was just curious, with the creation of these reservoirs and the potential for the hybrid technology with a land-based wind turbine generator, do you see or are you aware of research that is taking place for avian and bat deterrent technology? I could see the water definitely bringing in wildlife, and a wind turbine being a real conflict to have in the area.
Yes. So, I mean, I guess the impact on avian and other, wildlife, of all energy technologies is being constantly examined. I mean, DOE funds studies on that basically all the time. So INL is doing quite a bit of research on wind technologies and how to avoid hits with the, eagles and other avian, species and so on. And so that's something that is constantly being improved. And, of course, you cannot really always, have 100% avoidance, but I think that, it's being improved and the technologies are getting better in that regard. So, yes, I mean, it's always a concern, and we always, everybody, I guess, would like to avoid those, as much as possible. But sometimes you cannot really, reduce that to zero. But we always try to make it a minimum possible if can.
So I realize we're at the hour, and I understand if people have to drop off. Vladimir and Rocio, we have just a couple more questions in the chat. Do you have a few more minutes to stay on and see if we can address these?
Sure. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, will the future webinar cover pump storage hydropower projects planned outside of the US? And I think I can answer that one, which is that is not currently a planned topic. We will have a few more webinars planned, but that's good to know that's a question that's out there. So we can certainly consider that for being covered in a future presentation. So thank you. From Peggy Beltron, Cat Creek Energy and Water in Idaho has 110 megawatts floating solar on its upper reservoir. So I think that was a comment. And then Roger, you were following up to say, to build on Michelle's question, what other permits might be needed for these projects?
I mean, I think the big one is the license in the permitting side of things. There might be some kind of more construction related or land disturbance type of permits that you need more at the state or even municipal level. And yeah, then there's the land rights, the water rights, the water quality certificate, which is a precondition to get a FERC license. And it's again something that is done at the state level. So
let me just add that we're going to have a session that is just dedicated to all of the regulatory issues, including licensing and permitting and so on. And that's something that will be covered by not us, different experts will come for that. And so that will be, I guess, an opportunity to get into, details of that issue. So yeah, very deep. Mm-hmm.
Yes, great. When we'll have that in the next couple of months, so people can look out for that. Hilly Witten added water quality certification as well here. And I think this is the last question that we'll take from Duncan Hay. The 80% system efficiency that you cite seems awfully optimistic. Modern Kaplan turbines typically return 83 to 86% in conventional hydro installations. Pumping is generally less efficient, so it's difficult to see how pump storage can achieve 80%.
Well, 80% is something that is now pretty much industry standard for new pump storage projects. They are being built even with higher than 80% efficiency. In many of the pump storage power plants, they are not using Kaplan, they're using either Francis or Pelton turbines. But in cases of Kaplan, I mean that's yeah, correct here. But with the turbines that we have now, reversible pump turbines, they are pretty much over 90% efficient in either way. So that's something that contributes to 80% efficiency overall for the electrical system.
All right. Well, and with that, I think since we're a little over time here, that concludes today's webinar. Just as a reminder, the recording and slides will be available on the Western States Water Council and WestFAST website. The link to that is at the top of the chat here. I do thank everybody for joining today, and especially to our presenters for a great discussion here at the end. So thank you again, and have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
thank you all.